You know there are a lot of rumors
Sure.
out there right now, and you would like to address them head on, so I'll give it to you. Go ahead.
I have to, yeah. I'm here to admit that I am, in fact, HIV positive.
At 59, Charlie Sheen has finally revealed why he'll never marry. And it's not what you think. After 3 failed marriages, wild scandals, public meltdowns, custody battles, and a secret he kept hidden for years, Sheen says he's done for good. From hotel chaos to courtroom drama and a shocking diagnosis that changed everything, this is the real story he's never fully told, until now. Why did Hollywood's most reckless star give up on love? Join us. Born into fame, raised in chaos. Charlie Sheen was born dead. At least, that's what the doctors thought when they delivered him in New York City on September 3, 1965. His heart had stopped before his life had even begun. But somehow, against the odds, he came back. And that first brush with mortality set the tone for a life defined by chaos, survival, and second chances. His real name was Carlos Irwin Estevez, but before he was old enough to speak it, he was already surrounded by people who believed that the truth, just like your name, could always be rewritten. How does a child raised in the heart of Hollywood end up rejecting love, commitment, and even marriage altogether? How does someone surrounded by privilege and promise lose faith in the very idea of stability? And what exactly happened to Charlie Sheen before the world knew his name? Charlie's father, the legendary actor we know as Martin Sheen, was born Ramon Antonio Gerardo Estevez. But back in the late 1950s, that name didn't open doors. It closed them. Facing open prejudice in the casting rooms of New York, Martin changed his name to something more marketable. That lesson didn't go unnoticed by his son. Charlie grew up watching his father rise through the ranks of a brutal and unforgiving industry. One that judged you by where you came from long before it cared about what you could do. The early years of Martin's career were difficult, and his battles off-screen were just as intense as the ones on it. Struggling to provide for his family and facing repeated rejection, Martin fell into heavy drinking. According to Charlie's older brother, Emilio, things at home could get unpredictable, even dangerous. When Martin drank, he didn't just shut down, he exploded. Emilio later recalled that, as the oldest, he bore the brunt of that anger. As the youngest of 4 children, Charlie watched his home life fall apart and come back together constantly. His mother, Janet Templeton, tried to provide stability, but Martin's unpredictable work schedule, growing fame, and private battles with alcoholism kept the family in flux. By the time Charlie was old enough to understand what acting was, he'd already seen what it could cost. Hollywood wasn't just a backdrop, it was Charlie's whole world. His father's movie Badlands featured Charlie in his first on-screen appearance, sitting quietly under a street lamp beside his brother Emilio at just 8 years old. Charlie was no ordinary child. He wasn't just raised around the entertainment industry, he was embedded in it. His childhood wasn't filled with soccer practices or sleepovers. Instead, he sat on sound stages and listened to agents talk business. He saw actors break down off camera and executives laugh at scripts that never got made. He was a kid in a grown-up world, where the rules were different and the consequences came later. And like many children raised without clear boundaries, he started testing his limits early. By the age of 11, Charlie Sheen had already started using substances, long before most children have their first serious conversation about health or consequences. By 15, he had paid a red-haired woman for physical companionship using a stolen credit card, which his father discovered only after finding the charge on his statement. Martin confronted his son, not out of anger, but with the confused worry of a father who didn't know whether his child had made a mistake or was already too far gone. It wasn't just the behavior that shocked those around him, it was the way Charlie carried himself. Even as a teenager, he exuded a strange kind of confidence, bordering on arrogance. He didn't want rules. He didn't want discipline. What he wanted was freedom, and he would pay any price to get it. The irony is hard to ignore. While Martin Sheen battled to climb out of obscurity and build a respectable career, Charlie seemed determined to run headfirst into self-destruction, even when the doors were already open for him. At Santa Monica High School, he crossed paths with future stars like Rob Lowe and Robert Downey Jr., but even in that elite crowd, Charlie stood out. He didn't want to play by the rules. And that's how, from the very start, Charlie Sheen learned that love could hurt, that family could fall apart, and that even when the cameras stopped rolling, the drama never did. Marriages, scandals, and the final straw. It's the one thing Charlie Sheen never admitted out loud. Until now. At 59, the man who once called himself a high priest warlock finally came clean in a rare moment of honesty. He's never getting married again. Not just because he doesn't want to, but because he believes marriage, for someone like him, is emotionally dangerous, legally risky, and ultimately destructive. This wasn't just some offhand comment. It was a direct, unfiltered statement from a man who's survived 3 disastrous marriages, multiple restraining orders, a mountain of court filings, and years of public humiliation. So why did he finally say it? And what exactly pushed Charlie Sheen to swear off marriage for good? The story starts in 1995, when Sheen was 30 and at the height of his early fame. He met model Donna Peel during the filming of a cigarette commercial. They were married not long after, less than 6 weeks from their first meeting to their wedding. The marriage lasted barely 5 months. What's often overlooked is that their brief relationship coincided with a massive scandal involving a well-known Hollywood companionship ring. That ring, run by Heidi Fleiss, involved dozens of women, high-profile clients, and federal charges. Charlie was subpoenaed and eventually testified as one of the ring's biggest spenders. While most clients paid in cash, Sheen left behind a paper trail, writing personal checks that linked him directly to the case. He admitted to spending around $53,000 on companionship services in 1 year. The timing of this scandal and the collapse of his marriage was no coincidence. Whether or not Donna left because of it, Charlie's personal life and public credibility were already beginning to show cracks. 7 years later, Sheen married again, this time to actress Denise Richards. On paper, it looked like a Hollywood redemption story. 2 actors finding love, settling down, and starting a family. They had 1 daughter, then a second on the way. But in March of 2005, while she was 6 months pregnant, Denise filed for separation. What followed was one of the most uncomfortable and public unravelings of a celebrity marriage in recent memory. Denise made serious claims in her court filings, stating that Charlie had been behaving strangely and accessing disturbing online content. She expressed concern over his frequent mood swings, his emotional distance, and a pattern of unpredictable behavior that left her feeling unsafe. But what made this situation especially alarming wasn't just the divorce. It was the presence of children. Denise claimed that Sheen showed little concern for how his choices affected their daughters, that he brushed off her fears, and that he expected her to ignore his habits. According to Denise, she discovered he was subscribed to multiple websites featuring highly inappropriate material involving people who appeared underage. She also alleged that he watched adult content involving young-looking males, something Sheen later addressed by saying he cooperated fully with authorities, handed over his computers, and was never charged with anything. But even with no formal legal outcome, the damage was done. The trust between them had been shattered. Their relationship became so strained that, at one point, Denise Richards testified in court that she believed Sheen should not be left alone with their daughters without supervision. The third marriage came in 2008, when Charlie married Brooke Mueller. The relationship began with hope, but ended in crisis, on Christmas Day, no less. Police were called to the couple's home after what was described as a serious altercation. Brooke told authorities that Charlie had threatened her, and in response, law enforcement placed a court-ordered protection boundary between the two. In the weeks that followed, the public learned about more than just one disagreement. Both Charlie and Brooke accused each other of holding private recordings as leverage. She allegedly threatened to release footage involving him and another man. He, in turn, supposedly referenced documentation of her substance use. These mutual threats of exposure turned the relationship into a prolonged standoff. And though they remained legally married for another year, the reality is that it ended the moment the police arrived that Christmas morning. The pattern that connects all three marriages is hard to ignore. Each began with fast passion and ended with legal filings, personal accusations, and tabloid chaos. And while Sheen himself has never denied that he contributed to the destruction of these relationships, he's now making it clear why he won't go down that road again. According to Sheen, marriage is not just a personal bond. It's a legal contract that magnifies everything. When you're happy, it creates unrealistic expectations. And when things go wrong, it becomes a weapon. He's referred to marriage as an emotional pressure cooker, where every small disagreement becomes a financial risk, and every moment of weakness is recorded, litigated, and used against you. But perhaps the most revealing detail of all is how Sheen talks about trust. For someone who once lived with two girlfriends at the same time and called them his goddesses, he's surprisingly blunt when discussing emotional vulnerability. He says that the deeper the love, the higher the risk of betrayal. And after living through 3 divorces, each one more public than the last, he doesn't believe he can ever truly open himself to that risk again. Substance struggles, health reveals, and mental breakdowns. By the late 1990s, Charlie Sheen's career was still running strong. But behind the scenes, everything was falling apart. What the public saw was a charming, fast-talking actor with hit films and a growing reputation on television. What they didn't see, at least not yet, was a man caught in a brutal and private battle with substances, mental strain, and a dangerously escalating lifestyle. In 1998, the first major crack in the surface appeared when Charlie was rushed to the hospital for what was initially described as a medical emergency. The official story was vague, pointing to a health scare involving his heart. But later reports revealed the truth. It was a serious overdose after he had tried to inject a powerful stimulant, triggering what appeared to be a stroke. That moment forced his father Martin to intervene directly, calling emergency services and confronting the very real possibility that his son might not survive. It wasn't an isolated incident. Throughout the early 2000s, Sheen was in and out of rehab, sometimes voluntarily, sometimes pressured by friends, co-stars, or family members. There were interventions, some formal, some chaotic. During one particularly dramatic attempt in 1990, Charlie arrived at his father's house expecting a birthday celebration, only to find his siblings, his childhood friend Rob Lowe, a nurse, his 9th grade history teacher, and even Clint Eastwood waiting to confront him. He initially thought he was hallucinating. The group begged him to seek treatment. He agreed, but then tried to delay his entry into rehab in order to attend a bikini contest he had planned with Nicolas Cage. When they refused, he attempted to bribe the nurse at the clinic to let him go temporarily. These weren't just poor choices, they were the actions of someone deeply in denial about the severity of their condition. So how did it all spiral into one of the most infamous meltdowns in Hollywood history? That unraveling reached its peak in 2011, when Sheen, at the time still the star of 2.5 Men, began making a series of chaotic and widely publicized media appearances. After being suspended from the show for clashing with creator Chuck Lorre, Sheen launched into a now legendary press tour. His interviews were filled with strange metaphors, hyperactive speech, and surreal language. He claimed to have tiger blood, called himself a Vatican assassin warlock, and insisted he was not under the influence of anything except himself. When asked about his condition, he said, "I'm on a harmful substance. It's called Charlie Sheen," and warned that anyone else who tried it would not survive. His public behavior was so extreme that many people began to question whether he was experiencing a psychiatric condition. There was talk of mania, personality shifts, and delusional thinking. What most viewers didn't realize at the time is that Sheen had not yet been formally diagnosed with any mental health disorder. But several years later, he would publicly confirm that he had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, a condition characterized by alternating periods of intense energy and euphoria, followed by deep crashes or depressive episodes. In retrospect, the interviews he gave in 2011, the rapid speech, grandiose statements, erratic energy, fit the clinical profile of a manic episode. And yet, because Sheen had built a career on being unpredictable and over the top, many people simply assumed it was another performance. The fallout was immediate and severe. Warner Brothers officially terminated his contract with 2.5 Men, citing his inability to perform, growing instability, and the serious impact on both production and the safety of the cast and crew. Sheen, in response, filed a $100 million lawsuit, claiming wrongful dismissal and suggesting that the studio had betrayed him after years of service. He also launched a self-funded national tour titled My Violent Torpedo of Truth, a series of live performances that were neither stand-up comedy nor structured storytelling. Instead, they were chaotic, rambling events where Sheen delivered long, incoherent rants, played amateur videos, and responded to hecklers with frustration. At one show in Detroit, he was booed off the stage. Audiences had come expecting a train wreck, but what they witnessed was something far more unsettling. A man clearly in the middle of a psychological crisis, performing it live on stage for entertainment. So what was happening inside Charlie Sheen's mind during this time? One clue lies in his repeated rejection of medical help. He openly mocked the idea of taking medication, often implying that any form of treatment would dull his personality. He called traditional medicine a tool for conformity and claimed that his brain worked differently from others. He resisted being labeled. But even in his most extreme interviews, moments of clarity would sometimes slip through. Short admissions that he felt isolated, misunderstood, and surrounded by people waiting for him to fail. What's especially important to understand is that by the time the public was laughing at Sheen's antics, he was already deep into a years-long struggle with both substance dependence and untreated mental illness. These weren't isolated outbursts, they were signs of a long-term breakdown that had been building slowly, worsened by fame, pressure, and a lifetime of unchecked emotional trauma. His actions were unpredictable, yes, but they were also deeply human. He was a man raised in the spotlight, praised for rebellion, and encouraged to blur the lines between character and self until he no longer knew the difference. Eventually, After multiple stints in recovery and a series of personal losses, Charlie Sheen did begin to accept medical treatment. But the damage from those years still lingers. Looking back, it's clear that 2011 wasn't just the year Charlie Sheen lost his job. It was the year he lost control of his image, his mind, and nearly his life. Legal troubles, family losses, and his HIV revelation. By the early 2000s, Charlie Sheen's name had become closely associated not just with his work on screen, but with a growing list of legal and personal complications that painted a much darker picture behind the scenes. The actor who once dominated Hollywood comedies was now appearing in courtroom headlines, police reports, and custody filings. One of the earliest public legal entanglements came in the mid-1990s when Sheen was called to testify in the federal case against Heidi Fleiss, the well-known figure behind one of Hollywood's most prominent companionship networks. While many clients remained anonymous, Sheen was one of the few who left behind a paper trail. He had written personal checks to the agency, totaling what he estimated to be over $50,000 in a single year, though Fleiss later claimed the number was closer to $400,000. Unlike other clients who paid in cash and avoided legal exposure, Sheen's direct involvement placed him in the public eye as a central figure in the investigation. He avoided any charges but could not avoid the judgment that came with his admissions, particularly since the timing coincided with the collapse of his marriage to Donna Peel. But Sheen's troubles only escalated from there. Throughout the next 2 decades, he found himself facing repeated accusations of property damage, substance possession, and mistreatment in his personal relationships. In one incident at a New York City hotel, law enforcement was called after Sheen allegedly caused thousands of dollars in damages during a confrontation with a guest. The room was reportedly left in disarray, with furniture overturned and valuable fixtures broken. While no one was seriously hurt, the incident raised new concerns about his ability to manage his own behavior, especially while under the influence. These episodes weren't just isolated moments, they were part of a broader pattern that began to affect Sheen's ability to maintain custody of his own children. After his divorce from Brooke Mueller, Sheen and Mueller both struggled with stability, and their twin sons were removed from their care more than once. In one particularly difficult chapter, Denise Richards, his ex-wife and the mother of his 2 daughters, stepped in and took custody of the boys while continuing to raise her own children. She later described the experience as emotionally exhausting and physically overwhelming. The boys, just 4 years old at the time, displayed intense mood swings, emotional detachment, and violent outbursts that concerned Richards and others involved. She explained that they would destroy toys, throw objects at people and windows, and even hurt animals and their stepsisters. These behaviors were not blamed on the boys themselves, but on the unstable environments they had grown up in, marked by shifting homes, erratic adult behavior, and constant media scrutiny. The legal battles over custody and visitation became ongoing sources of stress for Sheen, and by the mid-2010s, his financial resources were increasingly consumed by court proceedings, support payments, and damage control efforts. One major legal case involved a dental technician who filed a lawsuit alleging assault and emotional distress during an appointment in which Sheen was reportedly incoherent and agitated. Although that lawsuit was later dismissed, it became yet another example of how his name was repeatedly linked with controversy that blurred the lines between health issues, public image, and potential liability. But the most personal and revealing moment in Sheen's public life came in November of 2015, when he announced during a live television interview that he was HIV positive. The announcement stunned audiences, not just because of the diagnosis itself, but because of the way Sheen described what had happened in the 4 years prior. According to Sheen, he had been diagnosed in 2011, but had kept it secret, fearing backlash and public ridicule. He admitted to paying millions of dollars, by some estimates up to $10 million, to keep the information private. These payments were reportedly made to individuals who had learned about his diagnosis and threatened to make it public unless he compensated them. Sheen stated that the constant threat of exposure had driven him to financial strain and emotional exhaustion. One of the most pressing questions following the announcement was whether Sheen had knowingly put others at risk. In response, he emphasized that he had informed every sexual partner after his diagnosis and had taken medical precautions. However, not all of his former partners agreed. At least one ex-girlfriend publicly stated that she was unaware of his condition during their time together and claimed to have learned about it through the media. The conflicting accounts sparked widespread public debate and further legal scrutiny. But no criminal charges were filed. Sheen stood by his statements and maintained that he had never acted with reckless intent. Despite the controversy, the impact of Sheen's announcement extended beyond the gossip columns. Almost immediately after his public disclosure, there was a measurable surge in online searches related to HIV, testing, and treatment. Sales of at-home testing kits increased dramatically, with one supplier reporting a 95% rise in just a few days. Health organizations credited the announcement with helping to reduce stigma around HIV, encouraging more people to get tested, and drawing attention to the effectiveness of antiretroviral therapy. Though the moment was deeply personal and painful, it also had real public health consequences that rippled far beyond Hollywood. A complicated fatherhood, emotional regrets, and achieving sobriety. Charlie Sheen's legacy as an actor is well known, but his story as a father is far more complicated and far more revealing, having had 5 children with 3 different women over the years. Each relationship came with its own emotional turbulence, and Sheen's role as a father was often shaped by the chaos that surrounded those partnerships. Charlie's first child was born when he was just 19 years old, long before his major roles in Platoon or Wall Street. Her name is Cassandra, and she was the daughter of his high school girlfriend, Paula Profit. Their relationship was never formalized through marriage, and in many ways, Charlie's role in Cassandra's early life mirrored the pattern that would later repeat with his other children: present in moments, absent in others, and inconsistent overall. Cassandra was raised mostly outside of the public eye, shielded from much of the media circus that followed Sheen's later years. But by her own accounts, she has always kept a respectful distance from her father's more volatile chapters. Years later, Charlie had 2 daughters with actress Denise Richards, Sam and Lola. For a brief period in the early 2000s, it looked as if Sheen had finally settled into a version of domestic life. He was newly married, sober, and starring in 2.5 Men, one of the most successful sitcoms on American television. But when Denise filed for separation in 2005, while pregnant with their second daughter, everything began to unravel. What followed was a series of legal conflicts, accusations of troubling online behavior, and periods of supervised visitation. Denise ultimately retained primary custody of the girls, and while Charlie continued to see them, his involvement fluctuated depending on the status of his sobriety and mental health. The pattern repeated itself again with Brooke Mueller, the mother of his twin sons, Bob and Max. Their relationship, marked by repeated disputes and mutual instability, eventually led to the children being temporarily removed from both parents' custody. At one point, Denise Richards was again asked to step in and care for the twins, even though she and Charlie had long since divorced. In legal filings, she described extreme behavioral outbursts from the boys, attributing their distress to the chaos and inconsistency of their home life. They were just 4 years old at the time. For many years, Sheen's ability to remain an active, responsible father was shaped almost entirely by his relationship with substances and the legal consequences that followed. As his public behavior grew more unpredictable, his relationships with his children became more fragmented. There were periods of closeness, especially during times when he was sober, but these were often interrupted by relapses, custody restrictions, or public controversies. One of his daughters, in a recent interview, claimed that she had not spoken to her father in several months, a statement that echoes the emotional distance many of his children have expressed over the years. But everything began to shift in 2018, after an experience that Sheen now describes as his final wake-up call. One morning, while still recovering from a long night of drinking, Charlie realized he had forgotten to take his daughter to an important appointment. Unable to drive safely, he asked a friend to handle the task for him, but the moment left him shaken. His daughter was old enough to understand what was happening, and for the first time, he truly felt her disappointment. That experience, he says, was what finally pushed him to get sober. Not the court mandates, not the career fallout, not even the media backlash. It was the realization that his daughter no longer trusted him. Since then, Sheen has remained committed to a structured, substance-free lifestyle. He wakes up early, avoids nightlife, and focuses his energy on being present for his children in a way he never was before. He has described this change not just as sobriety, but as a full reset of his priorities. He no longer chases roles, headlines, or attention. In interviews, he's been clear. His greatest fear is not losing another show. It's losing more time with his kids. So where does marriage fit into all this? For Charlie Sheen, it doesn't. He has said repeatedly that he sees no value in legally binding himself to another partner. He believes that marriage, for him, adds stress, expectation, and legal risk. 3 things he spent decades trying to escape. He prefers what he calls open honesty, meaning emotional connection without legal entanglement. He acknowledges that his views are shaped by experience, but also by personality. He doesn't believe he is wired for traditional commitment. He doesn't want the courtroom involved in his personal life again. He doesn't want his children to watch him enter yet another relationship that might collapse under pressure. And surprisingly, the people around him seem to accept that. Denise Richards, once his most vocal critic during their divorce, now speaks of him with kindness and understanding. She has said in recent interviews that Sheen is welcome at every family dinner and that their children see him regularly. Brooke Mueller, who once filed serious claims against him, now lives just a few doors away from Charlie and describes their dynamic as peaceful and cooperative. Even Chuck Lorre, the creator of 2.5 Men, the man Sheen once publicly insulted in a now infamous rant, has rekindled a friendship with him. In 2023, Charlie appeared in Lorre's show Bookie, marking their first professional collaboration in over a decade. Today, Sheen lives a quieter life. He doesn't attend parties, make headlines, or offer strange interviews. But what he can control, he says, is how he lives now, and how much of himself he gives to his family. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Click the next video for more exciting content.